3 years ago, we spoke to nearly 1,300 companies around the world. At that time, AI ethics was a board level conversation, and CEOs were a little bit out of sync. At that time, 85% of CEOs believed AI ethics and responsibility rested with their CIOs or CTOs. In my experience, that's flipped. AI ethics is now very much business led, with CEOs as champions that are ready to act. Risk and rewards have reversed, and there are strong incentives for leadership and action. And business conditions now demand action, and they're becoming ubiquitous today. Some AI you don't really care about the ethics of. Netflix recommendations, for example. If they get them wrong, so what? You get a bad movie served up to you. But some you do. If it affects your health, your wealth, or your livelihood, AI ethics is a really important topic. And consumers are more concerned over how companies are using their data, and they're less trusting of how personal information is being used. As AI is increasingly being used to inform decisions that affect people's lives, people are entitled to know how it's being used, how their data is being protected, and how their privacy is being respected. Employees and investors are voting with their skills and their dollars. They favor ethical and responsible organizations. And governments are responding to this sentiment as well by advancing regulations for AI in multiple areas around the world, especially in Europe. We have Christina Montgomery, our Chief Privacy Officer, with here today. And Christina, I'm interested to think, how did you start? We've done some of this at IBM, and you were one of the key figures kicking it off. How did you get this going? And is there a roadmap or a set of action? And if you've taken the steps to start, how can organizations further operationalize and scale their efforts?
So, Seth, that's a great question. And at IBM, we really do consider this a team sport. So we've got lots of players, all with different backgrounds, bringing diverse perspectives to our discussions around AI ethics. We started by forming a set of foundational principles. We call these our principles for trust and transparency. They're very similar to, if you're familiar with the OECD AI principles, and these form, again, the foundation for our approach to AI ethics here at IBM. And we have an AI ethics board that helps us put those principles into practice across the company. They help lead a culture of trustworthy AI. And we build tools and technologies that help address things like bias and explainability so that we have a way to sort of operationalize those principles in practice through tooling as well as just through policy. And then we advocate for policies and government, regulation and the like that's consistent with those principles and the practices. So consistency throughout our journey, really from principles to practices and then to advocacy. So consider the strategic context. That's really important, right? Our recommendation as part of the new Institute for Business Values study and action guide is to ground everything in your organization's values and strategic context. So for IBM, it's grounded around our beliefs and our approach to corporate social responsibility. We've been guided by the view for years, and our leadership in this space has resulted in us taking a human-centered approach to trustworthy AI, an approach that puts ethical principles at the core of our governed data and AI technologies and fosters an open and diverse ecosystem. It drives long-term value, not just in our business, but for this broader group of stakeholders, including our clients, our shareholders, our employees, and the societies in which we operate. We believe that every organization would benefit from consciously agreeing on what matters to them, and then aligning around those common set of values, and then determining from there how AI fits into your business strategy. The CEO is a natural choice to lead this, along with business and technology executives, and frankly, the board. The CEO, too, is the one who can set the tone and communicate the strategic points of view and the value and actions to employees and then to the public. They set really the tone from the top. So for example, our CEO, Arvind Krishna, is a co-chair of the World Economic Forum's Global AI Action Alliance. This is a multi-stakeholder collaboration platform and project accelerator that's designed to speed the adoption of inclusive, trusted, and transparent AI globally and across sectors. So we started with what matters to us, the ethical principles, and I should tell you what they are at this point. So our principles for trust and transparency are really very simple. They are that AI should augment, not replace human intelligence, that data and insights belong to their creator, so our clients, not to us, and that AI must be transparent and explainable. It should also be free of harmful and inappropriate bias in order for it to be trusted. And so then how do you establish AI governance? So this is where that team sport really comes to life. It's important to incorporate different perspectives, as I mentioned earlier, from different business owners, from your employees, from your customers. This should be informed by what's happening in the policy space and regulatory space. And you also have to take into account a broader ecosystem of players, like partners and suppliers. And for IBM, our internal stakeholders really do span across the organization. They are risk and compliance executives, our legal teams, government and regulatory affairs teams, communications, human resources, and diversity inclusion executives, the business and functional leaders from across the business, including research, sales, development, and designers as well throughout that process. And so it's important for us, when I came into this job, I approached it, I came in with a background in corporate governance, and we really wanted to build out those operational aspects to make our board capable of implementing centralized decision making to give it real authority, but also being sure we were bringing in perspectives from across the business and from across people with different focus throughout the IBM company, as well as different backgrounds. And because of that, we have very robust conversations around these topics in IBM.
Those are all good points, Christina. And if we focus in a little bit on the governed data and AI technologies, as you know, we really think of these as 5 different pillars. The pillars consist of transparency, explainability, fairness, robustness, and privacy. And transparency is really about ensuring that the models that we build, the AI models that we build, are open to inspection. From a fairness, as you hit on, they have to be, free and fair of specific harmful biases that are focused on specific use cases. Models also need to be explainable, meaning that we can determine how and why an AI came to a decision and put that in a language that people can understand. And they need to be robust and preserve privacy, meaning, they have to preserve the privacy of the individuals whose data is being used. And the models themselves, as well as the data governance and data security, need to withstand external pressures from bad actors. And when we help move these principles of trust to trustworthy AI in practice, and they're embedded in how we do it, they're made real, and they come to life in open source toolkits and within our technology platforms.
So this is where you can further move from principles into practice by integrating AI ethics into the full AI lifecycle. This doesn't have to necessarily be cumbersome. It should support the daily work that you do. And you have to ensure that your teams have clear guidance to progress their work, guidance to know what to do, what not to do, and how to do it, and that they're empowered to move forward in a way that aligns with the established principles. So this, for IBM, we accomplished this through the AI Ethics Board and through the project office that drives collaboration across the multi-stakeholder roles that we have throughout IBM. The project office can bring knowledge and expertise and perspectives together and drive business outcomes. It brings business and technology teams, whether it's HR leaders, AI designers and engineers, data scientists, and then AI champions who can guide and coach the teams. So one example of how we've moved through from principles into practice is if you look at COVID-19 technologies. So at the start of the pandemic, there were a number of solutions that we could have brought as a company to bear to help address the global pandemic. A whole host of things that were being proposed around contact tracing, fever detection, vaccine passports, those types of technology solutions. And we knew without trust, those technologies were not going to be adopted. So through the AI Ethics Board and with the help of the project office, we provided some clear guardrails with respect to not what we could do, but what we would do in terms of technology solutions to help address the global pandemic. And then we publish those. Again, this point of sort of advocacy. We were very clear. We wanted to be very transparent about the guardrails that we were putting into place and the decision-making process that we went through in determining what types of solutions we were going to bring forward to help society address the global pandemic. And so that's just an example of how, our board and the AI Ethics Board works to support these kinds of practices.
When we think about leadership and how leaders and teams are starting to get involved and need to get involved in this really important topic of AI ethics and AI governance, similar to how the role of the CEO has changed dramatically over the last few years, the roles of their leaders need to change as well. So CISOs, for example, need to ensure that they can manage threats and compliance in the context of AI. So are the models that are being deployed in an organization protected, similar to how data or just the outside perimeter of the company would need to be protected from bad actors? Legal is now a collaborative partner that helps review a whole range of responsibilities and consider liability, accountability as company builds applications and uses all types of data. The COVID example you brought up, Christina, was a great example where the legal teams and your organization, the chief privacy officer, were key partners in helping us determine what we should do and how we're going to do it in a risk-based manner. Diversity and inclusion leaders can also help ensure AI teams reflect the diversity of the societies that they operate in and the people that are being impacted. They can also help to attract and retain underrepresented groups. Designers and data scientists need to apply methods and tools and explore potential ethical concerns early. For example, design thinking exercises for AI ethics really focus on ethical AI design, how decisions have a ripple effect, and they help to focus on the human perspective. Who is going to be impacted by the AI? How are they going to be using that AI? And why are they even using it in the first place? And now the ethics by design methodology is deployed as best practice for all IBMers. And we hold AI ethics focused workshops for clients to help them plan sprints we'll work on them together. HR and talent teams can help skill and upskill for the organization's AI ambitions and curate and deliver tailored learning across the organization. The goal should be to have the entire organization be advocates for AI ethics. And we've made this curriculum available on the ethical deployment of AI. It's open to anyone, clients, partners, absolutely anyone interested.
Yes, Seth, it's so important that we have these types of resources available for anyone in the company, right? And even outside of the company, to the extent that we're working on that as well, because this is a global issue, a global problem, and solving for AI ethics is everybody's job. We want to instill a culture throughout the company of ethical AI and have everybody think of this much as they think, if you go back a few years from a develop and a design perspective, privacy and security by design, for example, now we think of ethics by design. And also it's critical at IBM. One of the other initiatives that we have here as a company is something we call the AI Advocacy Network. And through this, anyone can volunteer to participate in a project related to ethical AI. This helps to scale grassroots efforts across the company, and it also helps everybody to feel as if they have a role to play and can step up and participate in some of the global initiatives we have as a company. It's also important that we view ourselves here at IBM as especially on the policy side of things, it's important for us to participate in cross-industry governmental events, for example, multi-stakeholder dialogues. Multi-stakeholder conversations around AI ethics are critically important at this point in time, especially as governments are starting to frame their regulatory approaches to AI. So we've participated in a number of these discussions. We've also, as I mentioned earlier, in terms of our journey from principles to practices and then to advocacy, we've advocated and we've published policy positions on AI regulation. For example, we've called for the precision regulation of AI, so regulation that considers and regulates based on the risk, not regulating the technology itself. And we've made concrete, actionable recommendations for governments and for other industry players in that context. Consistent with our precision regulation approach that we published in the policy position a few years back now, the EU, you may be familiar with their AI Act. They proposed a framework for regulating AI back in the April timeframe, and it takes a consistent approach to our precision regulation recommendation. In other words, it's regulating and focused on regulating high-risk uses of AI, not all of AI. So again, it's regulating the use and the context and not the technology itself. So why is this so important? Because AI has so much potential. It has potential to make our lives better, to solve so many societal issues, to make our jobs more interesting, really to augment human intelligence. And we can do this all while avoiding that dystopian future. Again, if we take this human-centered approach, we put people first, we keep our principles at the foundation for how we're approaching AI, and we make it trustworthy. And so that's how we've been living this here at IBM and advocating for it, even in the absence of regulation.
Yeah, those are all really good points. And as you know, AI done right, when you ensure that you minimize biases for specific types of biases, can actually make decisions fairer and freer of bias. And this is a really important topic, so much so that there's lots of events going on around the world. Events like the World AI Cons Festival that's coming up. We hope to see you there virtually, and if possible, in person in cons. I'll be doing a keynote there, and we'll focus on the pillars of trust and how technology can help you advance trustworthy AI from principles into practice. Now, this has been a bit of a teaser or an invitation for you to join me at the World AI Cans Festival. Hopefully, I'll see you in person. If not, we'll see you virtually. Thanks, Christina. I really appreciate the conversation with you, and hope you all have a great day.
Thank you. Thanks, everybody.
Hi, I'm Kareem Yusuf, General Manager of AI Applications here at IBM. Building resilient business processes has never been more important to the enterprise than in these times in which we're living now, as we deal with continuous disruptions and challenges to our business operations and supply chains. But even more critical is, how do we do this sustainably? Sustainability is an important topic in all businesses as we consider quite literally the impact of how we operate on this very planet in which we live. It's important to our investors as they consider how businesses operate and where they wish to invest. It's critical to our employees as they think about the kind of companies in which they work and how values align. And maybe even more importantly, it's typically important to all our customers or consumers, as it were, as they think about who they wish to do business and who they wish to source from. When you think about sustainability, I like to kind of frame it in really around 5 key imperatives that I think are really guiding everyone's thinking and discussions. We often think about climate risk management and indeed ESG reporting. We worry about emissions and energy management. We think about our intelligent and resilient infrastructure and operations. Obviously, sustainable supply chains and circularity, and really binding it all together. What really is our strategy? What is the sustainability strategy? How should one, as an enterprise, feel about work their way through all these kind of key thoughts? It goes without saying that often a strategy manifests in a very key goal. And here at IBM, we think about that in the context of our goal to achieve net zero by 2030. Impacting that goal is shaped very much around how we think about energy emissions and management, especially from our facilities, real estate, manufacturing centers. It speaks to how we think about our key operations, obviously our supply chain, and it has driven a lot of key thoughts around, therefore, how we operate and, most importantly, collect and bring together the key data that enables us to shape and drive the decisions that we need to make in driving towards our goal. Because it's kind of essential as you think about this problem space to remember, at its heart, it is about, can we capture the data to understand what we're doing? Can we therefore inform key decisions that need to be made to enable us to actually then impact that data and drive towards our goals? And can we build these automated feedback loops, if you like, between our corporate initiatives and operational endpoints that actually allows us to truly begin to fine-tune our operations with sustainability in mind? And it's in that context that AI becomes extremely critical and extremely important, and has been the focus of our technology investments and evolution as we think about how do you apply AI to support these key processes and execution of these initiatives in the context of becoming a more sustainable and resilient enterprise. A couple of lenses through which we try to look at this problem are really, and that I'll expand upon, are really in the context of intelligent asset management, intelligent supply chain, and environmental intelligence. When you think about intelligent asset management, you're really talking about how do you get the best out of your critical enterprise assets. Think of these as anything from your buildings and facilities to industrial equipment to fleets, extremely critical in asset-intensive industries like energy and utilities as an example, but just as common and clear in maybe industries that are less asset-intensive, maybe think banking, but you do have still a lot of real estate and facilities to manage. How do you manage those assets in a way that extends their life, allows them to be used more efficiently, thinks about the carbon emissions that they're making, and drive yourself to therefore understanding and managing those things in accordance with your goals? This has been an area in which we've really begun to focus on, do we understand how an asset is behaving? Think, for example, an industrial turbine or a large bridge as part of a civil infrastructure. Do we understand how it's behaving? Can we use that information to fundamentally transform how we operate and maintain it in a way that enables a much more sustainable and efficient business process? Think about the work involved in inspecting a bridge and how much effort is expended in building scaffolding, in closing down the bridge, and finding and paying workers to climb up it. And imagine being able to use something as simple as a drone backed with AI to take many more pictures of the bridge than you could with, quite frankly, your visual eye, readily catalog and inspect that, and provide that back to the bridge engineers to help accelerate maintenance processes. You're not only becoming more efficient and effective, but quite frankly, expending less energy in terms of actually doing the process of inspecting that bridge. Begin to multiply that and think about that in terms of any key kind of asset you want to imagine, from a fleet wide of cars in a corporation to how you operate every single building for your employees. And you begin to see how connecting these dots, intelligently thinking about asset management, allows you to draw a direct line to your sustainability goals, particularly in the context of energy emissions management and resilient and intelligent infrastructure. Next, you think about your supply chain. Key and central to the supply chain is fundamentally optimizing inventory levels, which then raises the question, where is my inventory? And if you can figure that out, how is it made up, and how does it come through? Now, think about this in the context of a very simple scenario like food safety. We want to know where it was sourced. We want to know how it was made up. We want to know what it went through. If it is in a cold chain, you want to be able to confirm that it stayed in the temperature realms that it operated in. And you care about all of that across a wide swath of suppliers, sourcers, and the like, all integrating together. Such that, by the way, if things go wrong, it's very easy to effect and enact recalls. That requires us to lay down technology and infrastructure to link these different data points together. But as you begin to build up this information network, it becomes much more easier to begin to add in other key elements, like how do you do your scope 3 emissions calculations as you think about things moving through the supply chain? How do you begin to leverage transparency to inform how best you should optimize inventory because you really know where things are? How, because you understand what's going on in your supply chain, do you readily supply your consumers with key insights about how the particular commodity has been brought together? This is emerging as being particularly important in the realm of cosmetics, where consumers are becoming particularly focused on the sustainable practices involved around the items they buy. We see it emerging a lot also in food around commodities like coffee, and even improving the provenance of seafood, as an example. Where has it been farmed? How was it farmed? And how did it get to me? These are all things that tie directly into a focus on how you have a sustainable supply chain and begin to enable that kind of circularity and information sharing among all elements. This once again becomes a key area where we're focused as we think about how we bring technology to bear, how we leverage capabilities like blockchain to build readily connected information networks that suppliers can all engage in, and then more importantly, how we leverage AI to drive key insights and develop real understanding so that once again, intelligent decisions can be made. Layering across both these dimensions is then my third one of environmental intelligence. And this says, how do we really truly understand the impact of environmental conditions on either our key asset operations or, quite frankly, our supply chain performance? Here I think about from the very basics of long-term weather forecasting and doing climate impact analytics to the very immediate and tangible elements of, given all that, how can I begin to compute my carbon footprints and actually begin to calculate based upon all these validated data, the actual impact I'm having? Let me expand on this notion for a bit. When you think about climate impact analytics, I'm talking here about how is the climate going to impact the world in which we operate. You can think about this in terms of worrying about floods or fires. You can think about it in the more mundane, trying to understand how your vegetation needs to be managed around key transmission lines, as an example. If you think about that problem for a minute and think about the extent over which transmission lines typically have to travel, the geographical extent, optimizing how you manage your vegetation. Where do you go, as I like to say, to go trim trees? Really drives a lot of cost and efficiency, a lot of cost out of and efficiency into a process that often is very much just kind of a round robin mechanical process today, as people just have to work their way down the line. And we can do this by understanding how climate operates, by understanding what's going on with weather, by leveraging satellite imagery and using AI to begin to create an optimal picture of what's going on in the particular geographical location and how it might impact assets you care about, whether that's in order to do vegetation management or it's in order to determine flood or fire risk. Even more simply, it could just be to understand temperature variations as you think about the operation of your real estate, be that commercial employee buildings or manufacturing facilities, and what impact that's going to have as you project on your energy needs and how therefore you're going to consume or not consume energy from which sources. In order to shift to more renewable energy sources, you need to understand how you're consuming and how climate will impact those kind of consumptions. So these dots all begin to connect as you work your way through. You move on down and you think about, well, the other key element of all of this when we talk about environment is really carbon emissions. How do we do carbon performance management? How do we effectively measure and calculate what's going on? Now, we got basic standards that we all kind of embrace and leverage, and there are many out there. But the real interesting problem, when I think about it from a technology perspective, is how do you truly connect validated data from the endpoint through to your calculation energy, one, so that you can simplify how you measure and report at a corporate level, but two, even more importantly, that you can drive corrective actions. Imagine, if you would, the problem of refrigerant leaks. Take, for example, a big warehouse with lots of refrigerators storing key goods. Refrigerant leaks has a direct read on CO2 emissions. So when I think about it from the context of asset management, we're thinking about how do we effectively monitor those refrigerators, how do we detect leaks, and how do we accurately record that information. That has to all then be brought together in the context of carbon performance management and accounting to be calculated and surfaced so that one can actually begin to readily detect hotspots and drive key corrective actions. Think of this in the context of supply chain and optimizing distributed order management. When we often think of order fulfillment, we think about optimizing distribution of or fulfillment of orders in the context of what's the best warehouse for me to ship from, or am I using my retail stores where I have them as ship centers, and how am I leveraging this network to ensure that I can best optimally place and distribute the inventory I have in fulfilling the orders that need to be done. Often it is all driven by the very desire to intelligently promise to your end consumer a time at which this particular item will be delivered to them. But what we can also begin to introduce into that calculation is what is the carbon impact of any particular route or fulfillment option? And how can that be used to influence what choice is being made, whether in terms of presenting to your actual end consumer for them to make an informed choice about, in quotes, greener options, or whether it's in the context of thinking about how the choices you are making in these optimization routines fundamentally impact or align with your net zero goals or sustainability initiatives that you have laid out. And if there's a key theme that I'm trying to establish here in all our minds as we think about this notion of AI and sustainability, it is fundamentally that to say, we can define objectives. The key is, how do we bring our data and the processes and operations that actually generate that data in line with those objectives in a simplified, informed way that allows us, most importantly, to make intelligent decisions about what we need to do. Last one for you in terms of just thinking about behavior modification within the enterprise. A lot of focus as we look at, once again, doing effective carbon accounting and carbon performance management goes into the question of travel. And how do you begin to integrate this data into your travel systems as reservation systems, so employees in making those decisions around how they want to get somewhere, and we all hope we will be getting to more and more places in this current times that we live in, do they do that in the most efficient and effective way? Being informed enables intelligent decision making. And so when we here at IBM think about this question and the challenges of sustainability, we think, as I say, both internally, what are we doing with our own processes to ensure that we're driving more efficient, effective, and sustainable operations? And we think about this externally, as in what technology can we create, invent, innovate, evolve that we ourselves use as what we like to call the proverbial client zero, but also can provide to our customers, to our clients, to enable them to build resilient information highways that enable them to fundamentally support their sustainability goals and operations. And it's through that lens that we have really fixated on this notion of what we can do around intelligent asset management, how we can enable intelligent supply chains, and how we can wrap around all of that environmental intelligence that allows us to bring the key environmental conditions together and integrate them directly and succinctly into the operations around the business operations that a business has to go through, be it in terms of its assets or supply chains. So I find this to be pretty exciting times. I do think personally, as a civil engineer by training, that the very notion of building sustainable operations is kind of essential in all that we do and manifests so much in the world of civil infrastructure and the concept of all these key roads, tunnels, bridges, and everything that we have to put out there, and how do we maintain them more effectively. I feel a very personal connection to that also plays out in everything else that I find us working on in support of our clients. And as a deep technologist, I marry that with the notion of always having desired to apply technology to solve real world problems. And nowhere does this intersection come together for us at IBM so much in the context of how we bring AI to support key sustainable operations, delivering for us all, we hope, a better planet on which we can all live. Thank you.